The gunshot cracked through the Brooklyn alley like thunder. The body dropped, and two identical faces turned toward Kelly Watson in the darkness, their expressions cold as winter steel. Now, Kelly stood in a penthouse 50 stories above Manhattan, watching a stern woman in black turn the locks one by one. Click, click, click. Each sound was a nail in the coffin of her old life. "You're not leaving tonight," Mancini Rossi said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. He stood to her left in a tailored charcoal suit, dark eyes analyzing her like a problem to be solved. "Or ever," Roberto added from her right, his tone rougher, heated. Same face as his brother, same expensive suit, but where Mancini was ice, Roberto was fire barely contained. Kelly's hands trembled. She was 21 years old, a criminology student who'd never even been in a serious relationship, and she'd just been told she would marry both of these men, not because they loved her, not because she had a choice, but because she'd witnessed a Mafia execution, and in their world, witnesses didn't walk away, they disappeared. The twins moved closer, flanking her like predators. The doors were locked, the guards were posted, 50 floors up with no way down. "Let's discuss the terms of your survival," Mancini said, as if they were about to negotiate a business deal rather than her entire future. Kelly's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her old life had ended in that alley. Whatever came next would be written in the language of power, blood, and impossible choices, and tonight was only the beginning. Every voice helps keep our stories alive. Did this opening grip you? Does Kelly's impossible choice have you on the edge of your seat? Then tap that like button so we know you're with us. Hit subscribe to catch the next twist in this dangerous journey, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, your country, your city, what time it is where you are. Are you experiencing Kelly's terror at midnight or during your morning coffee? Your engagement keeps these stories alive, and we want to know where in the world our community is following along. Don't let stories like this fade into the algorithm. Your support matters. 3 hours earlier, Kelly had been worried about her criminology midterm. Now, she was living inside a case study on organized crime. Except this time, she wouldn't be writing the essay. She'd be the cautionary tale. The evening had started so ordinarily. She'd laced up her running shoes in her cramped studio apartment, pulled her dark hair into a ponytail, and headed out for her usual route through Brooklyn. The October air had that perfect bite to it, cool enough to keep her energized, but not so cold she needed more than her lightweight jacket. She'd mapped out her mental study guide as her feet found their rhythm on the sidewalk. Racketeering, money laundering, RICO statutes, all theoretical concepts that belonged safely between the pages of textbooks. The shortcut through the warehouse district had seemed like a good idea. She'd taken it dozens of times before, shaving 10 minutes off her route. The alley between the abandoned textile factory and the old shipping depot was poorly lit but familiar. She'd been halfway through when she heard the voices. "You had one job, Carmine. One simple job." The voice had been cold, almost bored, like a teacher disappointed in a failing student. Kelly had slowed her pace, instinct whispering that she should turn back, but curiosity, that fatal human flaw, made her peer around the corner of a rusted dumpster. 4 men stood in a circle beneath a flickering streetlight. 2 were identical, tall and broad-shouldered in expensive suits that had no business being in this neighborhood. The other 2 were on their knees, hands bound behind their backs, blood already streaming from their faces. One was crying, pleading in rapid Italian that Kelly's 2 semesters of language classes could barely parse. "Please, per favore, I can fix this, I can—" The gunshot cut off his words. The sound was nothing like the movies, sharper, flatter, more final. The man crumpled forward like a puppet with its strings cut. Kelly's gasp was involuntary, small, barely a whisper of sound. But in the sudden, terrible silence, it was enough. 4 heads turned in unison, 8 eyes locked onto her frozen form, and Kelly knew, with the crystal clarity that comes in moments of absolute terror, that she was going to die. She ran. Her sneakers slapped against wet pavement as she bolted back down the alley. Behind her, she heard shouts, the thunder of footsteps, commands barked in Italian. Her heart was a war drum in her chest. The main street was just ahead, just 50 more feet if she could just reach the lights and the people and the safety of witnesses. A hand clamped around her arm like a steel trap, yanking her backward with such force she nearly fell. Another hand covered her mouth, cutting off her scream. She was dragged against a hard chest, smelling cologne and gunpowder and danger. "Don't," a rough voice said in her ear. Roberto, though she didn't know his name yet. "Don't make this worse." She struggled anyway, animal panic overriding logic. But then the second twin appeared in front of her, and Mancini's cold, dark eyes met hers with something that might have been regret or might have been nothing at all. "You chose the wrong night for exercise, Tesoro," he said softly. "The question is whether you'll live to regret it." A black SUV pulled up, silent as a shark. Hands pushed her inside. The door slammed, and Kelly Watson, criminology student, jogger, ordinary girl with ordinary dreams, disappeared into the darkness between streetlights, into a world where the rules she'd studied no longer applied. The elevator ride to the penthouse took 47 seconds. Kelly counted each one, focusing on the numbers instead of the 2 dangerous men flanking her, or the way her legs trembled so badly she could barely stand. The SUV had driven through Manhattan in silence, crossing into a part of the city where doormen wore better suits than her professors, and security cameras tracked every angle. When the elevator doors opened, she'd expected something dark and menacing, a lair that matched the monsters who'd taken her. Instead, she stepped into a space of almost offensive beauty. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering Manhattan skyline. Modern art adorned walls of exposed brick and smooth plaster. Leather furniture that probably cost more than her yearly tuition formed intimate conversation areas. It looked like a spread from Architectural Digest, not the headquarters of men who executed people in alleys. "Sit," Mancini said, gesturing to a cream-colored sofa. It wasn't a request. Kelly sat, her dirty running shoes incongruous against the pristine rug. She was acutely aware of how she must look, ponytail askew, mascara probably smudged from tears she didn't remember crying, her jogging clothes cheap and sweat-stained compared to the luxury surrounding her. Roberto moved to a bar cart and poured amber liquid into 3 crystal glasses. Mancini settled into a chair across from her, crossing his legs with casual elegance, as if they were about to discuss the weather instead of her fate. When Roberto handed her a glass, she took it with shaking hands, but didn't drink. "Do you know who we are?" Mancini asked. Kelly's mouth was dry as sand. "Rossi, I heard the other man say it before you—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Before we killed him," Roberto finished for her, dropping onto the sofa beside her. Too close. She flinched and something flickered across his face. "Say it. You need to understand what you saw." "You murdered him," Kelly whispered. "We executed a traitor," Mancini corrected, his tone patient, almost professorial. "There's a difference in our world, Miss Watson." The use of her name sent ice through her veins. "How do you—" "Your driver's license was in your jacket pocket," Roberto said, pulling out her license and phone. Both looked absurdly normal in his large hands. "Kelly Ann Watson, 21, Brooklyn College, criminology major." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ironic." Mancini leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and the movement made Kelly shrink back into the cushions. "You witnessed a family matter. That creates a problem. In normal circumstances, that problem would be solved simply, permanently." "You'd kill me," Kelly said, surprised her voice worked at all. "We should kill you," Roberto agreed, and his bluntness was somehow more terrifying than a threat. Clean, efficient, no loose ends. But, Mancini continued, and Kelly's breath caught on that single word of hope, our family is in a delicate position. A missing college student would bring attention we can't afford right now. Police investigations, media coverage, federal interest. He tilted his head, studying her like a specimen. So we need a different solution. What solution? Kelly managed. The twins exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. Roberto spoke first, his voice rougher, almost reluctant. You marry us, both of us. You become family, bound by the same codes, the same rules. What you saw stays buried because you're no longer an outsider. You're one of us. Kelly's laugh was half hysteria. That's insane. You can't just... People don't... That's not even legal. Legal? Mancini repeated, and now he did smile, cold and sharp. Tesoro, we operate beyond your understanding of legal. The marriage will be binding in the ways that matter to our world. You'll live here under our protection and our control. You'll want for nothing materially, and you'll be alive. And if I refuse? Kelly asked, though she already knew. Roberto drained his glass in one swallow. Then we solve the problem the simple way. Tonight. You just disappear, Kelly. One more missing person in a city full of them. The room tilted. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her, girls who studied hard and jogged and worried about midterms. But the weight of their gazes, the casual certainty in their voices, the memory of that man crumpling to the pavement, it was all horrifically, undeniably real. Choose, Mancini said softly, but choose now. Our patience has limits. Kelly looked at her hands, still clutching the untouched whiskey. She thought of her mother in Ohio, her best friend Sarah, her plans for law school. She thought of everything she'd be giving up. Then she thought of never seeing any of it again because she'd be dead in a warehouse somewhere, another casualty of a world she'd only studied from safe distance. I'll marry you, Kelly whispered, and the words tasted like ashes. I choose to live. Mancini nodded, standing smoothly. Practical. Good. He pressed a button on his phone. Agata will help you prepare. The ceremony is in 1 hour. The doors opened, and a severe woman in a black suit entered. Kelly barely registered her approach, too focused on the sound of locks clicking into place behind her, sealing her inside her new reality. The ceremony had been brutally efficient. A priest who wouldn't meet her eyes, document in Italian she couldn't read, and 2 wedding bands that felt like shackles sliding onto her finger. Kelly had signed her name in triplicate, each signature a small surrender. The twins had kissed her cheeks, first Mancini's cool, controlled brush of lips, then Roberto's warmer press that lingered a half-second too long. Then it was done. Kelly Watson had ceased to exist. In her place stood Kelly Rossi, property of 2 men whose last name carried weight she was only beginning to understand. Agata had shown her to a bedroom that could have swallowed her old apartment 3 times over. This is your space, the woman had said in accented English, her expression unreadable. You'll find appropriate clothing in the closet. The twins will come for you when they're ready. Then she'd left, and Kelly had heard the unmistakable sound of a lock engaging from the outside. That had been 2 hours ago. Now Kelly stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, 50 stories above Manhattan, watching lights blink in buildings full of people living normal lives, people who are free. The glass was thick, reinforced. She'd tested it with her knuckles, some desperate part of her brain cataloging escape routes that didn't exist. Even if she could break it, what then? A 50-story drop onto Fifth Avenue? She turned from the window and really examined her prison for the first time. The bedroom was decorated in shades of cream and gold, beautiful in an impersonal hotel kind of way. A king-sized bed dominated the space, its implications making her stomach clench. An ensuite bathroom offered marble and luxury. The closet Agata had mentioned was actually a dressing room filled with clothes in exactly her size. Designer labels she recognized from magazine ads, dresses and shoes and lingerie that probably cost more than her semester's tuition. Kelly had stripped off her jogging clothes and showered, scrubbing her skin until it was red, trying to wash away the feeling of being watched, owned, trapped. She'd pulled on the simplest things she could find, black leggings and an oversized cashmere sweater, and braided her damp hair over one shoulder. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like someone playing dress-up in a life that wasn't hers. The bedroom door opened without warning. No knock, no courtesy. Mancini entered first, changed into dark slacks and a crisp white shirt rolled at the sleeves. Roberto followed, similar attire but somehow wearing it differently. His shirt less perfectly pressed, his presence less contained. "Settling in?" Mancini asked, though his eyes were already cataloging everything. Her wet hair, her choice of clothing, the way she'd instinctively backed toward the window when they entered. "Is that what you'd call this? Settling in? I'm a prisoner." "You're our wife," Roberto corrected, moving to lean against the doorframe, blocking her only exit. "There is a difference." "Not from where I'm standing." Mancini crossed to the window beside her, close enough that she caught his scent, something expensive and woody. "Let me show you your new home properly. You should understand the boundaries of your accommodation." He led her through the penthouse, Roberto trailing behind like a second shadow. The space was enormous, a masterpiece of modern luxury that money could buy and blood had paid for. The main living area flowed into a dining room with a table that could seat 20. A chef's kitchen gleamed with stainless steel and marble, though doubted either twin cooked. A library held floor-to-ceiling books in multiple languages. A home office with doors that closed firmly. "Off limits," Mancini said simply. But the small details told the real story. Security keypads on certain doors, cameras in every corner, red lights blinking like watchful eyes, windows that didn't open, armed men stationed at the private elevator, at the service entrance, and access points Kelly hadn't even noticed. "You have freedom of movement within the penthouse," Mancini explained, his tone almost gentle, like he was granting her a privilege. "But you don't leave without one of us. The guards have orders." "What orders?" Kelly asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "To keep you safe," Roberto said from behind her, and when she turned, his expression was difficult to read. "And to keep you here." They stopped at a terrace, actually outside, cold October air biting through her sweater. Kelly's heart leapt. Outside meant possibility, meant 70 feet to the next building, 50 stories up, armed security on every floor. Even if you could somehow get past all of that, where would you go? Your face is in our system now. We'd find you before you reached ground level. Kelly wrapped her arms around her, suddenly freezing. "So I'm just supposed to, what? Play house with my kidnappers?" "You're supposed to adapt, survive. Isn't that what you chose?" Roberto moved closer, and Kelly tensed, but he only draped his suit jacket over her shoulders. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle that it frightened her more than any threat. The jacket smelled like him, cologne and something darker, gunpowder maybe, violence worn casually. "You're cold," he said simply, as if that explained why he'd show her kindness after stealing her life. "I'm terrified," Kelly admitted, hating how her voice shook. "You killed a man, you kidnapped me, you forced me to marry you, and now you're showing me my cage like it's some kind of gift." Mancini's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Fear is natural, smart even. But understand this, Kelly, you're safer in this cage than you would be anywhere else. The moment you witnessed that execution, you became a liability to more people than just us. In here, under our names, our protection, you're untouchable." "Protected or possessed?" Kelly challenged. "Both," Roberto answered honestly, and somehow that brutal truth was more bearable than a comfortable lie. "Welcome to the family, Tesoro. You're one of us now, whether you like it or not." Kelly woke to find Agata sitting in the bedroom's armchair like a black-suited sentinel, coffee steaming on the side table, expression as severe as carved marble. Morning light filtered through the windows, and for one disoriented moment, Kelly thought she dreamed everything. Then she saw the wedding bands on her finger and remembered. "Get dressed," Agata said without preamble. "Appropriate clothing is laid out in the bathroom. The twins are in meetings. Today, you learn." 20 minutes later, Kelly sat across from Agata at the dining table, wearing a simple navy dress that fit perfectly and cost more than her monthly rent used to. A plate of fruit and pastries sat untouched before her. Her appetite had disappeared somewhere between witnessing murder and becoming Mafia property. "You think this is a prison," Agata began, pouring espresso with practiced precision. "You think you are a victim. Perhaps you are right. But if you wish to survive, you must understand the world you have entered." "I didn't enter it. I was dragged into it." The distinction is irrelevant now. Agata's accent, Italian, Kelly had learned, made even harsh truths sound almost musical. "You are Rossi. That name is both shield and sentence. I will teach you what it means." Over the next hours, Agata transformed from captor to professor, and Kelly found herself leaning forward despite her anger, her criminology training unable to resist the education. This was everything her textbooks had sanitized, the reality behind the theory. The Rossi family controls the eastern seaboard: gambling, construction, waste management, shipping. 5 generations of power, built on blood and maintained through respect. Mancini is the strategist. He sees 10 moves ahead, like chess. Roberto is enforcement. He ensures decisions are implemented, that respect is maintained. "You mean he kills people?" Kelly said flatly. "When necessary. But you misunderstand if you think it is chaos." Agata's eyes sharpened. "There are rules, codes that have existed for centuries. Omerta, the code of silence. You do not speak of family business to outsiders, ever. You do not cooperate with authorities. You do not betray blood." "I'm not blood," Kelly protested. "You married in. You wear the name. In our world, that makes you blood." Agata swiped to show Kelly photographs of stern-faced men and elegant women. "The family structure is everything. The Don, currently Salvatore Rossi, the twins' father, sits at the top. Below him are the underbosses, the caporogimes, the soldiers. Everyone has a role. Everyone has obligations." Kelly studied the faces, trying to memorize them, some instinct telling her knowledge might be the only power she'd have here. "And what's my role? Trophy wife? Prisoner?" "You are leverage," Agata said with brutal honesty, "and protection for the twins." "How does forcing me into marriage protect them?" Agata set down her espresso, measuring her words carefully. "You witnessed an execution of a traitor, Carmine De Luca, but what you did not know is that Carmine had brothers, cousins, associates who might seek vendetta. If the twins had simply killed you, it would have raised questions. A missing college student draws attention, police, FBI, media. The family cannot afford that scrutiny right now." Kelly's stomach turned. "So I'm alive because I'm more useful than I am dead?" "Precisely. But more than that, by marrying you, making you family, you are now under the twins' protection. Any harm that comes to you is an insult to the Rossi name. It triggers obligations of honor. Do you understand? You are safer as their wife than you would ever be as their victim." "That's insane," Kelly breathed, but even as she said it, the twisted logic was taking shape in her mind. This was the world her textbooks had tried to explain, a parallel system of justice and retribution, operating by rules most people never saw. "It is survival," Agata corrected. "There are 5 major families in New York: the Rossis, the Castellanos, the Vitales, the Sorianos, the Bernardis. They maintain peace through territorial agreements and mutual respect. But there are always tensions, always someone wanting more power. The twins are young to hold such authority, 32 years old and already underbosses. This makes them targets. So I'm what, a human shield? You are a complication, Agata said, with brutal honesty. Killing you would break the marriage bond, dishonor the family, potentially start a war done by rivals. Letting you go risks exposure. The twins chose the only solution that keeps everyone alive and maintains order. It is not kind, but it is strategic. Your head spun with the information, with the cold calculations that had determined her fate. You talk about this like it's normal. Honor and murder and... It is my normal, Agata interrupted. I have served this family for 20 years. I have seen what happens to those who do not understand the rules, who think they can challenge the system. They do not survive, Kelly. They simply disappear. The weight of that truth settled over the table like a shroud. Kelly looked at the older woman, really looked at her, and saw someone who had long ago made peace with moral compromises. Why are you telling me all this? Why help me understand? Agata's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because the twins could have chosen differently. They could have kept you ignorant, terrified, broken. Instead, they have allowed me to educate you. That is not mercy exactly, but it is not cruelty either. It is pragmatism. An informed wife is more useful than a hysterical prisoner. I'm still a prisoner. Yes, Agata agreed. But now you are a prisoner who understands the bars of your cage, and understanding, Kelly, is the first step to finding your place within them. The days began to take on a rhythm that felt almost like normalcy, if normalcy included armed guards and husbands who killed people for a living. Kelly's life had become a study in contrasts, defined by the two men who owned her name and controlled her fate. Mancini was a ghost in expensive suits. He moved through the penthouse like smoke, appearing and disappearing without warning, his presence more psychological than physical. He would sit across from her at breakfast, reading the Financial Times in silence, but Kelly could feel his attention on her like a weight. He noticed everything, when she pushed food around her plate instead of eating, when she'd been crying, when she stood too long at the windows looking at freedom she couldn't reach. He never raised his voice, never needed to. His power was in the measured observation, the loaded silence, the way he could make her feel transparent with a single glance. "You're not sleeping well," he commented one morning, 3 days into her captivity. Not a question, a statement of fact. Kelly's hand froze on her coffee cup. She'd thought she'd hidden the exhaustion, the dark circles she'd covered with concealer from the absurdly well-stocked bathroom. "I'm fine." "You're lying." He turned a page of his newspaper without looking up. "There's medication in your bathroom cabinet if you need it. Or would you prefer to continue pretending you're adjusting well?" The casual accuracy of his assessment made her skin crawl. He knew her sleep schedule, probably knew every time she paced the bedroom at 3 in the morning, every nightmare that woke her gasping. The cameras, she realized. He was watching even when he wasn't there. "I don't want drugs," she said carefully. "I want to go home." "This is your home now." He finally looked at her, dark eyes unreadable. "The sooner you accept that, the easier this becomes. Resistance is exhausting, Kelly, and pointless." He left her with that truth sitting heavy in her chest, a weight she couldn't shift. Roberto was different. Where Mancini was calculated distance, Roberto was unpredictable proximity. He would appear in doorways, sprawl on the sofa while she tried to read, invade her space with a casual confidence that made her constantly aware of his physical presence. He was larger than life, all contained violence and unexpected impulses. The first time he touched her, really touched her, not the perfunctory kiss at the ceremony, Kelly had been standing at the window again, forehead pressed to the cold glass. She hadn't heard him approach, hadn't known he was there until his hand settled on her shoulder. She'd flinched so hard she'd nearly fallen. Roberto had steadied her with his other hand, holding her gently but firmly, and something had flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or frustration. "You're always looking out," he'd said quietly, "like a bird in a cage." "That's what I am, isn't it?" He'd been silent for a long moment, his hand still on her shoulder, warm and heavy. "My mother was from Sicily, married my father when she was 19. She used to stand at windows too, first year she was here, looking back toward home." Kelly had turned to look at him then, surprised by the unexpected glimpse of something human beneath the enforcer exterior. Did she ever stop? Eventually. She found things here worth staying for. His thumb had brushed her collarbone, the gesture almost tender. "You will too." "I won't," Kelly had insisted, but her voice had wavered. Roberto had smiled, sad and knowing. "Everyone says that at first, Tesoro." The twins worked in tandem whether they intended to or not. Mancini would strip away her defenses with his clinical observations and strategic distance, leaving her feeling exposed and analyzed. Then Roberto would occur with unexpected warmth, a jacket when she was cold, an offhand comment that suggested he saw her as a person rather than a problem. It was disorienting, this good cop, bad cop routine, except both cops were kidnappers, and there was no one coming to save her. Kelly started watching them the way they watched her, observing patterns. Mancini handled the business calls in clipped Italian, pacing his office with military precision. Roberto disappeared for hours, returning with tension in his shoulders and sometimes blood on his cuffs he'd tried to hide. They argued in rapid Italian she couldn't follow, voices rising and falling like a familiar song. One evening, she witnessed an exchange that illuminated everything. A man had come to the penthouse, older, expensively dressed, with cold eyes that had lingered too long on Kelly. Mancini had handled the negotiation with surgical precision, dismantling the man's position piece by piece until he'd agreed to terms that clearly favored the Rossis. After he'd left, Roberto had materialized from wherever he'd been watching. "He'll try to weasel out of it within a week." "I know, that's when you'll pay him a visit." "Just a visit, or a permanent one?" Roberto's smile was sharp as broken glass. "That depends on how reasonable he's feeling." They both looked at Kelly then, standing frozen in the hallway, and she understood. This was their dance. Mancini created the problems, set the traps, played the chess game. Roberto was the hammer that fell when the game was over. Strategy and enforcement, mind and muscle, ice and fire. And somehow, impossibly, she was caught between them, learning to read their rhythms like her life depended on it, because it did. The transformation began so subtly that Kelly almost didn't notice it happening. One morning, Mancini didn't leave for his office after breakfast. Instead, he gestured for her to follow him, leading her into the room that had been strictly off-limits since her arrival. His office was a command center disguised as a gentleman's study. Dark wood, leather chairs, walls lined with books in Italian and English, but also monitors showing security feeds, filing cabinets with locks that probably cost more than most safes, and a desk covered in documents with numbers that made Kelly's criminology-trained mind start calculating automatically. "Sit," Mancini said, settling behind his desk. "Your education with Adata has covered theory. Now you learn practice." Kelly had remained standing, suspicious. Why? Because ignorance makes you a liability. He'd pulled out a ledger, the kind that shouldn't exist in the digital age, filled with handwritten entries and neat columns. And because you're going to be here a long time, you might as well be useful. That first session, he'd walked her through the basics of money laundering, how cash from illegal operations flowed through legitimate businesses, emerging clean on the other side, construction companies that inflated material costs, restaurants that reported triple their actual customers, offshore accounts in countries that asked no questions. The Castellano family controls the ports, he'd explained, pointing to entries in the ledger. 40% of container shipments coming through Newark pay tribute. Not in official manifests, of course, in lost cargo, in protection fees, in creative accounting. Kelly's textbooks had taught her the theory. This was the practical application, and despite her anger, despite everything, she'd found herself leaning forward, asking questions. How did they avoid detection? What happened when someone refused to pay? How did territory disputes get resolved? Mancini had answered every question with the patience of a professor who'd found an engaged student, and Kelly had realized, with growing unease, that knowledge was being offered as a leash. The more she understood, the more complicit she became, the harder it would be to ever walk away. The education expanded. Roberto started taking her to family meetings, never the dangerous ones, he'd assured her with dark humor, just the boring business kind. She'd sit in corners of restaurants the Rossis owned, watching negotiations unfold like theater. She witnessed a dispute over garbage collection routes in Queens, settled over espresso and cannoli, with handshakes and subtle threats wrapped in pleasantries. She observed an older capo explain to a young hothead why starting a war over a perceived insult would destroy 4 families and solve nothing. She learned that the violence, while real and ever-present, was actually the last resort in a complex system of negotiation, respect, and historical precedent. "People think we're animals," Roberto had said one evening, driving her back from a meeting in Little Italy, "that we just kill and take what we want. They don't understand the structure, the rules." "There are rules for murder?" Kelly had asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "There are rules for everything." He'd glanced at her, something serious in his expression. "Cosa nostra, our thing, it's older than America. Came from Sicily when legitimate power failed people. When they needed protection the law wouldn't give them. It became something else here, something darker maybe. But the bones of it, the structure, that's about survival, about community taking care of its own when no one else will." That's a pretty story for organized crime. It's not a story, it's history. He'd pulled up to a red light, turning to face her fully. "Your textbooks probably taught you we're parasites. Maybe we are, but we're also the reason Mrs. Catalano in the Bronx hasn't been evicted, why Tommy Ricci got his medical bills paid when his insurance denied him, why entire neighborhoods have jobs and protection the city doesn't provide." Kelly wanted to argue, to point out that protection rackets weren't charity, that the jobs came at the cost of legitimacy, but she'd also seen those ledgers, seen entries marked community fund and family support that didn't show up on any balance sheet. Agata filled in the historical gaps. Over afternoon espresso, she'd explain the origins of the 5 families, how the commission was formed in the 1930s to prevent wars that had nearly destroyed them all. She described the old country traditions, the way respect and honor were currency more valuable than cash. The Rossis came from Corleone, the word making Kelly's eyes widen. She'd seen The Godfather, everyone had. Yes, that Corleone. Salvatore's grandfather arrived in 1919 with nothing but family connections and knowledge of the old ways. He built an empire through respect, through being the man people came to when they had nowhere else to turn. And the price for that help was loyalty? Always. That is how power works, Kelly. Not just in our world, in yours too. Politicians, corporations, universities. Everyone trades in favors and obligations. We are simply more honest about it. The education was working. Kelly could feel herself changing, see the world through a lens her professors had never provided. She was learning the language of this life, the subtle hierarchies, the historical grievances between families, the difference between a soldier and a made man, the significance of who sat where at a table. Knowledge became her currency. When Mancini reviewed territory maps, she started anticipating conflicts before he pointed them out.
When Roberto explained why certain debts couldn't be forgiven without losing face, she understood the psychology behind the violence. She was learning to think like them, and that terrified her more than anything else they'd done. "You're getting good at this," Mancini had observed one evening, watching her correctly identify a problem in a ledger. "Don't sound so proud. You're just making me complicit in your crimes." "No," he'd corrected, something almost like respect in his eyes. "I'm giving you power. Information is the only power you'll have here. I suggest you use it."
The cracks in Kelly's certainty began with small things, moments that didn't fit the neat narrative of captors and captive she'd been clinging to like a lifeline. It was Roberto who first shattered her carefully maintained emotional distance. They'd been in the penthouse living room when one of the capos had arrived unannounced, already drunk at 3 in the afternoon. Paulie Vitali, nephew of the Vitali family Don, with a reputation for volatility that even the other families whispered about. Kelly had been curled in an armchair reading one of the Italian history books Agata had assigned her when Paulie had stumbled in, his eyes finding her immediately with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "So, this is the pretty little witness," he'd slurred, moving closer despite Mancini's cold warning from across the room. "The college girl who saw too much. You know, in the old days, we wouldn't have been so accommodating." Kelly had frozen, book clutched like a shield, as Paulie leaned over her chair. His breath reeked of whiskey and cigarettes. "Maybe I should test the merchandise, make sure she's worth all this trouble." Roberto had materialized between them so fast Kelly hadn't seen him move. One moment Paulie was reaching for her, the next he was slammed against the wall, Roberto's forearm across his throat, lifting him until his feet barely touched the ground. "You even think about touching her again," Roberto had said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "and they'll be fishing pieces of you out of the Hudson for weeks." The violence should have frightened her. It did frighten her, but underneath the fear was something else, a confused flutter of gratitude, a feeling protected rather than threatened. Roberto had glanced back at her, checking if she was okay, and the genuine concern in his eyes had done something dangerous to her carefully maintained hatred. After Paulie had been escorted out, still nursing his throat, Roberto had approached her carefully, like she was something breakable. "You all right?" "I'm fine," Kelly had managed, though her hands were shaking. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His voice had been firm, no room for argument. "You're ours to protect, Kelly. That means something." The incident had replayed in her mind for days, her criminology training warring with her visceral response. Was this protection or possession? Was she grateful or just conditioned? The questions had no clean answers. Mancini's gesture had been quieter, but somehow cut deeper. Kelly had been in her room when he'd knocked, actually knocked, which was unusual enough to make her suspicious, and entered carrying a large envelope. "Your transcripts," he'd said simply, placing them on her desk, "and your laptop. The Wi-Fi is restricted. You can't email or access social media, but you can use it for coursework." Kelly stared at the envelope like it might bite her. Inside were her college records, her class schedules, everything from her old life. "I don't understand." "You were studying criminology, maintaining a 3.8 GPA according to these." Mancini had leaned against her doorframe, casual but watchful. "You had plans. Law school, probably. Prosecutor, if I had to guess, given your sense of justice." "That life is over," Kelly had said bitterly. "You made sure of that." "That life, yes, but intelligence doesn't disappear because circumstances change." He'd pulled out another folder, correspondence with Brooklyn College. "I've arranged for you to continue your degree remotely, independent study. You'll have to take exams here, proctored, obviously, but you can finish." The gesture had stolen her breath. This was her captor, the man who'd forced her into marriage, who watched her through cameras, who'd made her a prisoner, and he was giving her back the one thing that had mattered most, her education, her future, or at least some version of it. "Why?" The word came out broken.
Because a mind like yours shouldn't be wasted. Mancini had straightened, preparing to leave. And because you'll be here a long time, Kelly, you might as well become who you were meant to be, even if the circumstances have changed. After he'd left, Kelly had opened her laptop with trembling hands and found all her files intact, her bookmarks, her half-finished essays on criminal justice reform. She'd started crying and couldn't stop, confused tears that were grief and relief, and something else she couldn't name. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Kelly had forced herself to confront the terrifying truth. She was starting to see them as people, not just her captors, not just criminals, but complex men capable of both violence and unexpected kindness. Roberto's fierce protection, Mancini's respect for her intellect, these weren't the actions of monsters, but they were still the men who'd stolen her life. She'd read about Stockholm Syndrome in her psychology electives, knew the signs, developing positive feelings towards captors, seeing their perspective, defending them. Was that what was happening to her? Or was she simply seeing clearly for the first time, understanding that people could be simultaneously cruel and kind, that morality wasn't the binary her textbooks had suggested? The confusion gnawed at her. She caught herself laughing at something Roberto said, then hating herself for it. She found herself anticipating Mancini's approval when she correctly analyzed a business problem, then feeling disgusted by how much that approval meant. She was losing the clear lines that had made this bearable. Captor and captive, right and wrong, them and her. "You're thinking too hard," Roberto had observed one evening, finding her on the terrace wrapped in blankets against the November cold. "I can practically hear the gears turning." "I'm trying to figure out if I'm going crazy," Kelly had admitted, too tired to deflect. "You kidnapped me, forced me to marry you. I should hate you. I do hate you. But then you do something decent and I don't know what to feel anymore." Roberto had been quiet for a long moment. "We're not good men, Kelly. Don't make that mistake. But we're not simple either. People aren't simple. That doesn't make this okay." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't. But maybe it makes it survivable."
The explosion shattered the 3 a.m. silence like the world ending. Kelly jolted awake, disoriented, her heart already racing before her brain caught up. The windows rattled in their frames. Alarms shrieked through the penthouse. Somewhere, glass was breaking, and beneath it all, the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Her door burst open, Roberto, shirtless and armed, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Stay down," he barked, already moving toward the window. "Mancini, how many?" Kelly realized he was wearing an earpiece, receiving information she couldn't hear. She scrambled out of bed, instinct warring with terror. More gunshots, closer now. The building shuddered with another explosion, and the lights flickered once before emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in eerie red. "Bernardus," Roberto spat, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. They hit the ground floor security, at least a dozen men. Mancini appeared in the doorway, fully dressed despite the hour, gun in hand and phone pressed to his ear. His eyes found Kelly immediately. The panic room, now. "But," Kelly started, "now." The command was absolute, brooking no argument. Roberto grabbed her arm, not gentle, but not cruel either, hauling her toward a section of the library wall she'd never paid attention to. Mancini pressed something, and the wall slid open, revealing a reinforced steel door and a room beyond lined with monitors and supplies. "Stay inside until one of us comes for you," Mancini ordered, already turning away. "Don't open this door for anyone else. Not the guards, not Agata, no one." "Wait," Kelly's voice cracked. "What's happening?" "War," Roberto said simply, and there was something almost apologetic in his expression. "The kind we've been trying to avoid. Apparently, the Bernarduses think tonight's a good night to test the Rossi defenses." More gunfire erupted, now echoing through the penthouse itself. They'd breached the upper floors.
Kelly's criminology training kicked in through the panic. Coordinated assault, multiple entry points. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned. Go, Mancini shoved her toward the panic room, even as he raised his weapon toward the hallway. Roberto, take the east corridor. I'll cover west. But Roberto hesitated, looking at Kelly with an expression she'd never seen before. Genuine fear, not for himself, but for her. If something happens, it won't, Mancini cut him off coldly. Move. Kelly stumbled into the panic room, and the door started sliding shut, but not before she saw Roberto sprint down the corridor, saw Mancini drop into a shooting stance, saw the first shadows of armed men rounding the corner. The steel door sealed with a hydraulic hiss, cutting off the sounds of violence, leaving her in climate-controlled silence, broken only by her ragged breathing. The monitors showed security feeds from throughout the building. Kelly watched in horrified fascination as the battle unfolded, armed men in tactical gear pouring through breached entry points, the Rossi guards fighting back, bodies falling on both sides. It was nothing like the movies, no dramatic music or clean choreography, just brutal, chaotic violence. She found the feeds showing Mancini and Roberto, watched them move through the penthouse like lethal shadows, coordinated despite being separated. They'd done this before, she realized. This wasn't their first war. Then the monitors showing the panic room entrance flickered. Not a glitch, something deliberating blocking the camera. Kelly's breath caught as the door shuddered, someone testing it. Then came a voice, muffled but clear. Come on, college girl. We know you're in there. Make this easy on yourself. Not Rossi men, Bernardus's. Kelly backed away from the door, looking frantically around the panic room. Supplies, water, communications equipment, and there, half hidden behind a filing cabinet, a second door, smaller, marked with emergency exit signage. A way out that bypassed the main door, probably leading to the service stairs. Her heart hammered as she understood what she was seeing. An escape route, a way to leave while everyone was focused on the battle, while the building's security was compromised, while chaos reigned. The door shuddered again, harder. We can cut through this eventually, or you can open up and maybe we let you walk away. You're not family, not really, just some girl who saw something she shouldn't. We got no beef with you. Kelly's hand was on the emergency exit handle before she'd consciously decided to move. Behind her, the main door groaned under assault. Ahead, freedom, the street, her old life, law enforcement who might actually help her now that the Rossi protection was fractured. She could run. She could finally run. But on the monitors, she saw Roberto take a bullet to the shoulder, saw him stumble, saw Mancini appear from nowhere, providing cover fire, dragging his brother behind a marble column, saw the blood spreading across Roberto's shirt, the grim determination in Mancini's face. They were killers, criminals, the men who'd stolen her life. They were also the men who'd protected her from Polly, who'd given her back her education, who'd shown her unexpected humanity in a world of violence. Roberto had defended her without hesitation. Mancini had respected her mind when he could have just broken her spirit. And they were dying out there, while she stood in safety they'd built for her. Last chance, the voice beyond the door growled. Kelly looked at the emergency exit, looked at the monitors showing the twins fighting for their lives, looked at her hands, at the wedding ring she'd never asked for but wore anyway. The choice crystallized in a single clarity-filled second. She grabbed the emergency radio from the wall. Mancini, she said into it, praying he could hear over the gunfire. 3 men outside the panic room. They're trying to breach. East stairwell is clear. You can flank them from there. A pause. Then Mancini's voice, tight with pain or surprise or both. Kelly? East stairwell, she repeated, her voice steadier now. You have maybe 60 seconds before they cut through. She'd made her choice. Not escape, not the freedom she'd dreamed of every night, but the men who, against all logic, she'd started to believe might actually keep her alive. God help her, she'd chosen to stay.
The aftermath of Kelly's radio call unfolded with brutal efficiency. Mancini and 2 guards had flanked the Bernardi attackers within 90 seconds, catching them between the panic room they were trying to breach and gunfire from behind. The fight was short and savage. When the panic room door finally opened, it revealed 3 bodies being dragged away, and Mancini, his suit torn and bloodied, standing in the doorway. His eyes met Kelly's, and something passed between them that had no words. She'd had her chance. The emergency exit had been right there, unlocked, leading to freedom, and she'd chosen to stay, chosen to help them instead. "You called it in?" he said, finally, and it wasn't quite a question. "I saw them on the monitors." Kelly's voice was steadier than she felt. "I thought you should know." Roberto appeared behind his brother, left arm in a makeshift sling, his face pale but his eyes sharp. "You could have run," he said, the same realization Mancini had reached. "That exit leads straight to the street." "I know." Kelly swallowed hard. "I chose not to." The weight of that choice settled over them like snow, soft and suffocating. Kelly had crossed a line she could never uncross. She'd actively helped them, protected them, chosen their survival over her freedom. Whatever moral high ground she'd been clinging to had crumbled the moment she'd picked up that radio. "Why?" Mancini asked, and for once the calculating mask had slipped. He genuinely wanted to understand. Kelly looked at them both, these complicated, dangerous, unexpectedly human men who'd stolen her life and somehow, impossibly, made her care whether they lived or died. "Because you would have done the same for me," she said simply. "You have done the same for me." The truth was more complex, layered with Stockholm Syndrome and survival instinct and genuine connection she didn't want to name, but it was also the only truth that mattered in that moment. Roberto moved forward, his good arm pulling her into an embrace that smelled like gunpowder and blood and relief. "You're insane," he murmured into her hair. "Absolutely insane." "Probably," Kelly agreed, and felt tears she'd been holding back finally spill over. "I had a clear shot at escape and I stayed. I think that's the definition of insane." Mancini's hand found her shoulder, a rare physical gesture from him. "No," he said quietly. "It's the definition of family." 5 years later, Kelly stood in the same penthouse library, watching morning light paint gold across familiar walls. So much had changed. The nervous, terrified girl who'd been dragged here against her will had been replaced by a woman who moved through this world with hard-won confidence. She'd finished her criminology degree, with honors, working twice as hard to prove to herself she hadn't been broken. She'd learned to speak fluent Italian and conversational Sicilian. She'd memorized the family trees, the territory maps, the complex web of obligations and debts that governed their world. She'd become exactly what Mancini had predicted that first night: useful, informed, and dangerously complicit. The twins emerged from Mancini's office, their morning meeting concluded, moving toward her with the easy familiarity of years spent in close quarters. Roberto dropped a kiss on her forehead as he passed, heading for coffee. Mancini paused beside her, following her gaze out the window. "Regrets?" he asked, because he still noticed everything, still read her better than she sometimes read herself. Kelly considered the question honestly. Did she regret staying that night? Regret the life she'd built in this gilded cage? Regret the way she'd learned to love 2 men who'd given her no choice in loving them? "I regret that I never had a real choice," she said finally. "I regret the girl I was, who had dreams that didn't include any of this. I regret that my freedom was the price of my family's safety." "But," Mancini prompted, because he knew her well enough to hear the unspoken word. "But I don't regret who I've become," Kelly said, turning to face him with meeting his dark eyes without flinching. "I don't regret understanding this world, learning its rules, finding my power within its constraints, and I don't regret choosing to stay when I could have run." It was the truth, complicated and morally gray, and impossible to classify as simply right or wrong.
She'd been a victim who became a participant, a prisoner who'd found agency in unexpected places, a captive who'd learned that freedom wasn't just about unlocked doors. "Good," Mancini said, and almost smiled. "Because you're stuck with us now, Tesoro, for better or worse." "Mostly worse," Kelly shot back, but there was no heat in it, just the comfortable banter of a relationship that had evolved beyond simple definitions. Roberto returned with 3 espresso cups, handing them out like a domestic ritual they'd performed 1,000 times. They stood together at the window, looking out at the city that had witnessed her transformation. 3 people bound by choices made in desperation and darkness, who'd somehow built something resembling love from the wreckage. Kelly had learned the hardest lesson her criminology professors never taught, that morality was messier than textbooks suggested, that people contained contradictions, and that sometimes the most important choices weren't between right and wrong, but between different versions of survival. She'd chosen to stay, she'd chosen them, and 5 years later, standing in her gilded cage with her dangerous, complicated husbands beside her, Kelly finally understood that some prisons were built with more than locks and walls. They were built with connection and complicity and the terrible, beautiful complexity of human hearts learning to beat in sync. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined, but it was hers, chosen freely in the only moment freedom was possible. And that, perhaps, was enough.
If you've been swept away by Kelly's journey from terrified captive to a woman who found power in impossible circumstances, if the dangerous complexity of Mancini and Roberto kept you hooked until the very end, then we need you to do something for us. First, smash that like button. Let us know this story moved you. Second, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always first to know when we drop the next unforgettable tale of love, danger, and impossible choices. And finally, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, your country, your city, the time where you are right now. Are you finishing the story at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, or watching during your lunch break? We want to know where in the world our global community is experiencing these stories. Your next obsession is just one click away. Don't miss it.